Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Josh Vickers with the Forensic Technology Center of Excellence at RTI International, and I'll be your moderator and host for today's event. Today's webinar is entitled Neurophysiology and Overcoming Trauma, Understanding Individual Challenges. Our subject matter expert and speaker of the day is Dr. Patricia Speck. She graduated from the University of Tennessee Health Science Center College of Nursing in 1982 with a bachelor's, and then her master's in 1985 and her doctorate in 2005. After retiring from UTHSC College of Nursing as the DMP Public Health Nursing and DMP Forensic Nursing Concentration Coordinator, she joined the University of Alabama at Birmingham School of Nursing in the Department of Community Health, Outcomes, and Systems. Currently, Dr. Speck is a professor and coordinator of the Graduate Advanced Forensic Nursing Program of Study. She experiences international recognition as a board-certified family nurse practitioner, an expert in advanced forensic nursing care of patients, experiencing an intersection with the legal system. She was also president of the International Association of Forensic Nurses from 2003 to 2004, chair from the American Public Health Association's Family Violence Prevention Forum Caucus, and is currently the Academy of Forensic Nursing and Forensic Nursing Certification Board member. Just our quick disclaimer, the opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. Any products and manufacturers discussed are presented for informational purposes only and do not constitute product approval or endorsement by the U.S. Department of Justice. And now, without any further ado, I'm going to switch everyone's layout. We're going to bring up Dr. Speck's presentation, and then Dr. Speck, the floor and microphone are yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome. Today's webinar explores how personal experiences and unique traumas create a commonly felt physical symptom, and we're going to investigate how the brain functions reflect a reaction to danger, an action to promote survival, and later, an interpretation of the event. Next slide. So while I expect to strive to make the information available to you in a timely and accurate manner as possible, I claim nor promise or guarantee the accuracy, completeness, or the adequacy of the contents, and expressly disclaim liability for errors or omissions. There's no warranty of any kind, implied, expressed, statutory, or otherwise, about infringement of third-party rights, title, mercantilability, fitness of a particular purposes, or freedom, or computer virus, or respect to the contents of this virtual presentation, or links to other internet resources that are embedded in the program. So references in this presentation to any specific commercial product, process, or service, or any use of trade, firm, or corporation name is for informational and convenience for the public, does not constitute an endorsement, recommendation, or favoring by me. Photographs are from Creative Commons or a government website, and they're used for educational purposes only, and it's without an intent to harm any copyright holder. Next slide. My professional responsibility is to bring you published evidence on the topic, and evidence emerges daily. But if you are a licensed provider, it is your responsibility to seek out, understand, interpret, and implement the best evidence for your practice, as well as peer review for not only your competence, but also your competency. So I hold no responsibility for your interpretation of the material or the application to your practice. Now, that said, we have some objectives today. Today we're going to talk about, but not necessarily in the order, an exploration of the neurophysiology and the way the brain works. And we're going to explore some epidemiologic evidence related to trauma, and especially the evidence that supports overcoming traumas, and reflect about your personal journey. Traumas of your parents, your grandparents, childhood traumas they may have experienced and passed on to you, and particularly want you to reflect about your personal capacity to overcome minor traumas. Next slide. So this is a slide that I've had since the 80s. How does a beautiful baby end up a truant, a petty theft, addicted, a sex worker, or homeless person? Think about that infant. Can you see the infant in the bed? How about holding the infant? How about the infant interaction with you? Can you ask the question, what happened? Next slide, please. Well, I'm going to take you through Psych 101 in your college days, or at least for my grandchildren in high school now. It's a stress theory by Selye, and it's from the 1930s. Do you remember that he was called the father of stress theory? He's actually responsible for the medicalization of understanding stress. And, well, the beginnings of trauma-informed care are really rooted in the stress theory by Selye. And he described the stress response in 1935. He added to the knowledge about health and adaptation, and his cycle of stress has actually presented a new concept in 35. He tried to bridge the gap between physiology and psychology. I love his saying, the true scientist never loses the faculty of amazement. It's in the essential of his being. And that's pretty much what drove me in my community to continue the curiosity about the patients I was treating. So next slide, please. If you're interested in Selye, the URL at the bottom of this slide is a great historical article about him. It describes the stress cycle as a circular life event composed of 4 phases: a resting phase, a tension phase, a response phase, and a relief phase. You don't have to remember that right now because we're going to go over it in depth. These actual phases are the basis for the proper handling of each phase, and they provide for the healthcare provider, and hopefully for you too, a unified model for study. And for me as a nurse, it followed the biological, psychological, social, spiritual responses that my patients were expressing to stressful events. Next slide. So in a chart, Selye's phases look like this. First, there's the alarm phase, as noted by the A. Your first reaction to stress recognizes there's a danger and prepares you to deal with that threat, fight or flight. Activation of what we call the HPA axis by the nervous system focuses the adrenal glands to squirt out some hormones called ACTH and glucosteroids. During this phase of the main stress response, these hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline, they give the person in the alarm phase that instant energy. Now, if this is not repeated or discharged with physical activity, it can become harmful. So too much adrenaline results in a surge of blood pressure, can damage your blood vessels, and it's a risk factor for heart disease and stroke. We see this in older people who die within a few days of a loved one dying, and their fragile health succumbs to the hormonal overload. Think about Barbara Bush and President Bush, who was hospitalized within the week of her death. So the excess production of these cortisol hormones can cause damage to the cells too, and to muscle tissue. These stress-related disorders and disease from cortisol include cardiovascular, stroke, ulcers, high blood sugars. And at this stage, everything works as it should. You had this stressful event, your body alarmed, you're in a sudden jolt, you're getting these hormonal changes. Now you're equipped with enough energy to handle it. That is, if you are that Arkansan in Colorado who got attacked by a mountain lion, if you're running on a trail, or if the alligator comes out from Florida to snap you up. Those are uncommon. They make national news. But what happens to the person is eventually they get into the resistant phase. The body shifts into the second phase, and that is the B phase, and begins to try and restore the balance for a period of recovery and repair. And this renewal actually does take place whether you want it to or not. You may have reduced your defenses and adaptive energy is gone. In fact, you're actually exhausted. Many people go to sleep after these events because they are so exhausted. So when you look at C, C is a stressful condition that persists. Your body adapts to a continued effort to resist, but it remains in a state of arousal. The problems begin to manifest when you find yourself repeating this process too often with little or no recovery. For instance, in a situation of domestic violence. In the case of that Arkansan who killed the mountain lion, he spoke on the news about the shakes he had and about how thinking made him think about the shake again, because when he thought about it, he began to shake again. Ultimately, he will run out of energy and he'll move into the final stage, which is D, exhaustion. At this phase, the stress continued for some time. The body's ability to resist is lost. The adaptive energy supply is gone. We often refer to this as overload, burnout, adrenal fatigue, maladaptation, dysfunction. And here's why stress levels go up and stay up. This stage is the most hazardous to your health because it chronically stresses and damages nerve cells in tissues and organs. Particularly vulnerable is in the brain, where the hippocampus actually will shrink. It doesn't get enough supply of nutrients. When that shrinks, you can't think. Your memory goes away, and you have a tendency toward anxiety. Remembering, like the fella from Arkansas, thinking about that cat produced another surge of the alarm. Once you're exhausted, you become tired, depressed. I think that the autonomic nervous system that's chronically elevated contributes to the blood pressure, heart disease, stress-related diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and diabetes. Even obesity is linked to chronic stress. So with these progressive changes of the general adaptation syndrome, given a choice, why would anyone purposely choose this path? Next slide, please. So let's bring it home. Do you identify with this fella? You ought to. If you've ever had to take a test, what happens? You're not prepared. You're numb. You detach. You worry. You're not in real time. You depersonalize it. You may even have amnesia. When you experience the trauma, you're experiencing trauma through the five senses. That is olfactory, taste, vision, hearing, and feeling. Next slide, please. So why do we lose our memory? Well, we all know older people are slower with their memory. But do we know that stress hormones divert blood glucose to exercising muscles? Because the amount of glucose, that's your energy, that's also what reaches your brain. Because we lose our memory, The short-term memory is the first casualty. And how does it do that? Oversecretion of hormones. And the culprit is a glucocorticosteroid. It's secreted from the adrenals, as I said earlier. The perceived threat, not the actual threat, will get those adrenals going again unless there is an intervention. Adrenal gland steroids remain much longer than the adrenaline that's out there because the noradrenaline comes out and counteracts it. So if you think about where it affects the brain cells, then it makes sense, doesn't it, that your short-term memory will be poor. Your capacity for understanding time, your ability to get anywhere on time is affected. So let's go to the next one. Next slide, please. So with that diversion of blood glucose into the muscles, it creates that energy crisis. So how is somebody going to get their memory back? So you've been traumatized, you have poor memory, you sleep, you feel better when you wake up, your memory's a little better. Those memories are going to come back incrementally, and they build on other memories. So you don't have the full memory at the time. You have bits and pieces coming. The research in the literature says journaling with reflection is an excellent way to recapture what happens to victims of disasters, sexual violence, domestic violence, child abuse. Next slide. So if the mind is blank, you know that if the police are involved in a shooting, they get 2 days to sleep it off. And this is something that's stuck in my craw for almost 40 years. Why is a victim expected to say everything immediately? And I think it has to do with a lack of awareness of how memory is formed, so that the memory history that comes from the person is going to be disjointed. It's going to flip from place to place, and it's likely going to cause problems in communication. And it's directly related to the chemicals that communicate in the nerves with each other. So cortisol can make it difficult to think and retrieve even long-term memories. And that's why people have difficulty in severe crisis. Their mind goes blank. Their lines are down. They can't even remember where the fire exit is if they're trapped in a fire exit. Next slide. So what are the factors shaping a traumatic response with an individual? Well, it's going to be the nature and magnitude, pre-trauma functioning, how much trauma have you had, how old were you at the age of your first trauma? Was it pre-conception? Was it actually in your parent and the parent passed it to you? Is there a continued disruption in your life, a life of chaos? Do you have support systems? And what is your personality? So when we look at this next slide, we're going to look at the physiologic changes that occur. And that would include, next slide please, that would include the heart rate. It goes up. Respirations go up. Your pupils dilate. And you have a dry mouth. In your affective and mood, your emotional response, you get fear. You feel helpless. Even horror. So let's go to the next slide. Are you back to your former self, really? Your sympathetic jumps into action. Your parasympathetic tries to calm it. You get exhausted, and then soon your memory's gone. If the perceived danger has passed, your body does try to return to normal. But what happens if you're triggered again and again and again? When you have a hyperactive sympathetic nervous system, the system jumps into action immediately. It's real slow to shut down. It's real hard to override it. Once it's been activated, the system wisely keeps you in that state of readiness. I recently read an article about epigenetic transfer in mice that were shocked when they smelled almonds. Not only did the mice have an aversion to almonds, they passed it to their children and their grandchildren. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So let's look at what happened in World War II. This is of interest to me because these are nurses. And so when they looked at the nurses who were raped, they saw that women exposed to conflict-related sexual violence had greater PTSD. And it was related to avoidance, hyperarousal, as well as anxiety. That's even for the nurses who were in World War II trauma battles. Let's look and see what the rest of that study said. When we look at the neurobiological research and the studies that were done on these nurses, we found out that long-term post-traumatic sexual assault and post-traumatic sequelae is in the sexual assault of survivors more than any other survivor group. So what's going on with sexual assault that in World War II that may not be going on today? And I would say they were unable to talk about it because of societal view of rape. So let's go to the next slide. Let's look at PTSD following sexual assault with a cohort by Fraser. He found that PTSD is more likely in sexual assault survivors than domestic violence, child abuse, and others. It also is more likely in individuals who receive very few services or if they're re-victimized, like the World War II nurses. But that 3 times greater PTSD was held with depression, alcoholism, and injury. So if you have it, PTSD may associate it with depression, alcohol, and injury. Mental health sequelae is worse in the adolescent comfort women during World War II. These were the Korean and Chinese women that were held as sex slaves for Japanese soldiers. So if they were adolescent, they had worse mental health sequelae than the adult women who were taken. Negative social reactions and PTSD have a strong correlation. So think about the societies where women are raped and about the acceptance of victimization and the victimization literature and about the associations with the symptoms that we're seeing when PTSD is present. Next slide. So how did you get to be you? What we know is we've long been aware of trauma and knowledge of trauma, especially those of us who work in emergency departments or in public health clinics. But did we know that our grandparents' experiences influence our health? And this is because of the long-lasting impact and prevalence of adverse childhood experiences and life traumas like poverty, war, government programs. The realization resulted in application of trauma-informed care in a wide range of settings, including mental health and substance abuse treatment facilities, child welfare systems, schools, and criminal justice institutions. We now know, just like the research told us in the previous slide, that the younger you are, the more impact rape, domestic violence, even your parents' and grandparents' traumas will have on you, and you will not live as long as the person who did not experience those adverse events. So in addition to what you inherited, how did you be you? So to begin this inquiry, let's look at some history and figure out how people respond to serious stress. Civil War, they called it the soldier's heart. We know that Vietnam soldiers experienced triggering and flashback. So let's keep on this path because I'm going to show you how did you get to be you. Your grandparents, go back one slide. Think about your traumas, your grandparents or parents. All these are pictures of the Great Depression, the Hunger Winter, the train on the bottom. The Great Depression, jobless men keep going. The abandonment of children, the sale of children during the Depression. Frequent moves to follow work, migrations, the internment camps for Japanese, the separation of children from their families in the destruction of Native American cultures. How did you get to be you? We also have a slide up there that says Irish need not apply. So hundreds of years of Irish being low on the totem pole without privilege. So let's look at the products of the Great Depression. When you're a child, things that were so hurtful, thinking about your childhood, you got the message, you're no good, you're too much trouble, you're ugly, you're fat, you're this, you're that. So you learn to trust no one. You feel that the very persons in your life growing up should have provided you unconditional love, and then you go to school and there's the bully in the playground. The mean girls in school, that's what my grandchildren experienced. Teachers who say things that are hurtful. The person who has trapped you at a vulnerable time, lured you into regretful and shameful experiences. You got mad, you had dreams, you acted out, and then you turned it inward because you didn't trust anyone now. You learned methods to get what you wanted, even if it meant setting up chaos in your life. You never take responsibility for what you do. It's always someone else's fault. Now, let's reflect on our patients, on the people we serve, on the people who ask us for help. We all know people like that. These photographs, I think, give us an anchor to begin to understand what might have happened epigenetically. So let's go to the next slide. Our own personal traumas, again, I have to ask. Emergency room nurses are notorious, especially with the playing cards comment by the elected representative. You got to be some kind of stupid, one actor said, if you're going to anger 3 million nurses. Now, this is the thing. What nurses see is the same thing that fire department sees, it's the same thing that police department sees, it's the same thing as first responders see, and periodically even citizenry will see horrible scenes. The question is, do you understand what's happening to you and how to transition that event into a healthy, integrated experience? So what typically happens, that vagal nerve was reset. It's no longer calm. You're not safe. You couldn't trust your environment. And to feel good, you seek the increased sensations of the vagal nerve. For those of us who run to a crash, it made us into adrenaline junkies. And the way we come down is through alcohol, and legal drugs to calm our nerves. Now we routinely see the horror in emergency departments. We've compartmentalized it. So then how do you calm your nerves? When I ask a group of nurses that, inevitably they have a wine glass, a martini glass. So then some fell into the abyss of addiction, and they end up on the other side. So do you have illnesses that are a result of the exhausted phase in the general adaptation syndrome? And if you do, are they the autoimmune system, where your body's in hyperdrive and now it's attacking you? In other words, rhetorically, how did you get to be you? And then I'll ask again, how does a baby grow up to be homeless? So let's go to the next slide. Selye's thrust theory took 65 years for us to get this. And understand stress and trauma, mediate. And in the aftermath, it relates to our health. And to formalize and implement trauma-informed care, Selye was right. And he's got all these great sayings. He actually didn't have a life that was relieved of stress, but he did, and he died at 75. But knowing what we do today, could he have lived longer through his early childhood stress of war and displacement? But what did he leave us? Well, lots of research and great sayings. A man should not avoid stress any more than he would shun food. As much as we thirst for approval, we dread condemnation. And adopting the right attitude can convert a negative stress into a positive one. Hang on to that, because people like Bruce McEwen, he was able to explain it more. Next slide. So our particular case, we want to know what's happening with the lifetime experience. And how many of you are really glad to share it? Did you know that toxic and chaotic home environments, even while in the uterus, affect brain growth and development? The nature part of this equation is really important. Nobody wants a baby affected by a vitamin deficiency, right? So they take vitamins. But I'm thinking about neural tube defects and other deficiencies. But what about the reproductive age woman who's counseled to take vitamins up to a year before attempting to become pregnant because she's in a chaotic home? Her grandparents were in the Great Depression, or her parents were in World War II. My husband says Vietnam. And what he says, it doesn't matter who's shooting at you. That's the big war. So regardless of the trauma that you experience, your brain changes. How do we prevent the reduction in brain mass? So think about it. more likely if you experience these things that your brains are not going to fully develop. In fact, children with high ACE scores have the highest lack of activity in the brain. They also, by mass alone, have the lightest brains. So let's ponder this. When they look at twin studies, and we have developmental psychologists that taught us about developmental milestones. That first one was trust. You got nature and you got nurture. What if your safe home is no longer safe? How many of you who are listening believe in resilience? Well, let's take a look. Here's some rhetorical questions, and I don't have answers. Is resilience a state experiences. Do personal choices, social support for those choices and adjustments shape our brains and thinking? And maybe adverse experiences causes death? Ponder this. When the twin astronauts, Scott Kelly, returned from the space, 17% of his DNA changed from his brother's. Do you think he was under stress? Such stress can trigger epigenetic changes that he will pass to his children that no longer look like his brother. So if this true, every interaction we have shapes the architecture of our brains. This is especially true for the developing younger brain that doesn't fully develop until, for girls, about 25, for guys, 29 or 30. My mother used to say, be nice. It takes on a special meaning today with the understanding of nature and nurture and the impact on our health. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be honest, genetics, epigenetics, these are scientific terms, and I'm going to be honest, the geneticist and the epigeneticist don't agree, so I'm just going to produce what I think is my version of what is genetics. So genes deal with light. color.